Hello, today I have a special guest. Her name is Alisha Ruiss. She's a professional vocalist, writer, and vocal coach, and she gives voice lessons at her studio in Little Italy. And I'm going to interview her today. So, welcome, Alisha.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice to be here.
I guess my first question is how did you, growing up, decide to become a vocalist? Tell me about that process.
So many different reasons. I can think of kind of two key things. I started singing in choirs and in church pretty young. I'd say like 8 or 9. So church was probably the first focus of when I began singing in choirs. And then it was around the age of 10 that I heard Celine Dion for the first time. It's such in a way, like a cliche Canadian story. But it was the first kind of pop singer I encountered that wasn't just someone my parents listened to. And, she was from Quebec and she was French Canadian and she was starting to make it on the world stage. And so she inspired me a lot. And that was kind of like step one. And then with musical theater is when I started doing musicals in the community, but especially in high school. And the first musical I did was Jesus Christ Superstar. And when it ended, I was like, this is what I want to do with my life, and broke down and cried because the show was over and kind of surprised myself at that emotion. And was like, oh yeah, I really love this. So those would have been the two points, I'd say.
So hearing Celine Dion and then also the experience of being in a musical.
Yeah.
That combination of things.
Yeah, okay. Exactly.
And what was it about the musical that, how did that light go off? What was it about the musical experience that...
I think it was the bigness of the experience, the largesse. I was very lucky. The school that I went to in that particular period of time, we were using the local theater in Brantford, which was the Sanderson Centre. It still exists. It's a beautiful 1,100 seat theater, still one of the bigger theaters I've performed in, ironically, and just absolutely gorgeous space. And so instead of being in a school cafeteria, I had that experience of being in this big space with a huge cast. It was high school, but they had a kids choir, so often the cast would be close to 100 people. So and it was just, there was something about the experience, not only that was artistically fulfilling because it was so big and communal, but there was something very comforting about going through this process of delivering a creation each night, which was at once the same and always had its uniqueness, because every show is unique every time you go through it. And I don't know, it's strange to say because people don't necessarily think of the theater as a comforting world, but for me, I was I loved the feeling of the blue light backstage, I loved all the individual songs and just knowing what came next. And so a lot of that was I feel at home, backstage and on stage. And,
okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, well, it seemed in a way like a strange detour on some level. I went and I spent 1 year in a musical theater program before I went to McGill. But I had this notion at the time. I was just I should, and this was encouraged by many teachers, you should go to a classical music program. You have a classical sounding voice. So I was sure, what do I know? I was very pliable in the sense that I really trusted my teachers, and I think they were giving me the best advice that they knew to give. And so I was if I get classical technique, I'll have a good base for anything else. Mm-hmm. I'm of two minds about that now. I still think that's very true in some respects. I don't know if I wouldn't have gotten there just by a slightly different route if I decided not to go. But it did shape me in the sense of, McGill does have a reputation for excellence. So I think it was mainly the singers around me who were all so talented in various ways, and just being surrounded by great voices was probably the thing that made me the most aware, and sometimes it was intimidating, what the voice can actually do at its fullest potential.
Yeah.
But my foot was I always had one foot out the door. My heart was still with musical theater, even though I was there. I had never planned to be an opera singer, and I never fell in love as much with the repertoire as I did with show tunes. But I'm glad that I had that experience, and the name of the university helps too. It's nice to be able to I went to McGill. Totally. People still react to that somehow.
Yeah, for sure. So I read one of your blog posts when we first met, and I thought it was super interesting, and it sounded like you had a really sort of organic, supportive approach meaning like it's not cookie cutter. Like it sounded really sort of, like individualized to each student, but also really supportive. And I guess I'm curious, like how you developed that approach to teaching.
Yeah, I think probably because when I was younger, like I did teach a little bit while I was in university, and I did try a kind of cookie cutter approach. Like I gave everyone the same breathing exercises to start and the same like warm-up exercises. And while I don't necessarily use a super wide variety of exercises, at the moment anyway, you know, I found some key ones that I find are sort of accessible to everyone in the particular style that I'm teaching. I do try to say like, focus in on what does this person need right now. So I think that's what I realized, just that a one size fits all doesn't work for everyone, depending on what their experience is, what are their, you know, what is their life like, what kind of attention can they give to their artistry, what has their day been like that day, you know. So if somebody comes in and they're carrying a lot of tension and a lot of fatigue, I have to take that into account. I can't just be like, we're starting here. It's just like, and I think the phrase I've used more and more often recently is like, I treat the voice like a baby, and not in a diva-ish sort of way, you know, like the voice can withstand a lot, but just to say, if you're waking up a baby, you don't pick up the baby and say, good morning, you know, you gently wake up the baby, you might sing the baby songs, you might like stroke their cheek. So the idea is that if I'm waking up this gift and I haven't used it at all today, well, then I'm going to start quietly and softly, and so to treat it with respect, you know, and with care, and that's something that I think that, you know, we can get frustrated with our instruments, say it should work, you know, and kind of push ourselves. But yeah, so that individual approach I think came partly from just recognizing that people are coming in with a different body and a different set of experiences, and physically that has an effect. So where they're going to be at that day can be affected by all those things, and so you have to kind of begin with the reality that's in front of you.
Yeah. Okay. And tell me about the journey of maybe some of your students that you've seen, the transformation, like from going from that, like sort of treating the voice like a baby really gently to where you can sort of take a student. Yeah.
Well, I think probably the most notable, without naming names, is that sometimes people come in with a lot of what I would call, let's say, nervous energy, which is normal because it's always going to be strange to sing for one person. You know, it's that still, you know, will never really get normal, even for me. I mean, if I was doing a little kind of sing-songy demo for you, that's different. But if I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to sing a song directly to you, it's always strange. It's like very artificial. So that setup automatically can just create nerves, even if you have the most, you know, comfortable, you know, and welcoming setting possible. So I think one of the things that just has to happen for people in general is to come in and to find a way to discipline themselves to get rid of that nervous energy through a physical process, but also through taking themselves seriously in the best way, you know, not too seriously, but in the sense that's just like, okay, treat yourself like an artist right now. Don't sing before you're ready to start singing. Don't just like throw yourself out there. So like, okay, I'm positioned properly, I'm in the right frame of mind, I'm not spaced out. We all space out sometimes, but just to say, okay, so sometimes it's that getting through that thing of, oh, I want to get it right away, or this kind of franticness. And so I think that that's probably a common thread through many people, is just coming through and be like, okay, I'm comfortable to just be here in my own skin and do the proper preparation, even if that preparation is 2 seconds, you know, that's been assimilated over a long period of time through exercise to say, okay, yeah, I'm just going to do it, and I'm not going to comment on it or have all these outside voices. I think that's the clearest thing that I can say, you know, without kind of showing a demo. Like, this is what they sounded like before, and this is what they sound like now, you know. It's not always that striking, and it varies from day to day, too. You know, you could have a lesson where at the beginning, the voice is just kind of all over the place, or it's not sitting well, and then at the end, I'm like, okay, the sounds that you got in the last 3 minutes, that's where you want to go. And then after that, it really depends on the work that they put in. Yeah, well, I mean, to begin to say, like, Jeanne is awesome. Like, she's already awesome. Like, when she came to me, she's got great musical instincts. She's a good musician. So she was already a very strong singer. Both last year when she did Joseph and Cabaret. So with her, it was very much like tweaking a few things, like, and it centered around like, here's how you can give yourself an easier time. Here's how you can make it more efficient. So it's more, and I do like that kind of work because you can get really nitpicky and you can sort of say, okay, if you're starting here, you can actually do that at, let's say, 50% of the physical effort that you're giving, but still get the type of sound that you need, so that when you want to sustain a certain energy or vocal flexibility throughout a performance, you'll be able to do it. So a lot of the times that's kind of, at least with Jeanne, that was sort of the work that I did. And I'm flattered that people say there was a big transformation. Like I think she came in fully capable of already doing the role, and already sounded great when she came for the first coaching. And I just sort of told her, I'm like, you can actually do less and it's still going to be brilliant, you know? So it was kind of, and it's also addressing a whole work, right? Whereas it's like, okay, you could go up and sing a song, it can be impressive. Can you do 8 shows a week for 3 weeks in a row, not be tired, or how to handle it when you're sick? So that's kind of the thing too, is to say, somebody could go throw themselves at a role, could be great, not really have any training, but maybe they have no voice for 2 weeks after. Could they have been more efficient? Probably. You know, like we never know. Like, you know, can't diagnose someone like that. But yeah. So I'd say it's really like looking at if there's any problem spots. You know, if someone's like, I just don't know how to approach this, then sure, I go to those. I'm like saying like, what's the difficulty? Let's just like clean up any difficulties first, and then if they're already sounding great, it's just like, okay, well, let's give yourself. If you're in a really good place, let's give yourself choices. You know, musical choices. Could you choose to use this sound instead? If you're transitioning from this sound to this production of sound, is that going to be more difficult, or is it going to make things easier for what's coming later? So it's kind of a lot of, it's like a marathon, right? You know, you don't train for a marathon the way you train for sprints. So that's what musical theater is, you know, especially if it's a role where you're singing through the whole show, as with Cabaret or with Joseph, the narrator part.
Okay.
Sure.
So I'm curious, in your teaching, like where do you draw the line and find the balance between technique and artistry? So sort of finding that student sound and balancing it with the technique.
Right. So for me, the thing I'm always after is freedom and ease. And I'm talking about physical freedom and ease. So if you can get a balanced, healthy sound, that's your gateway to choices. Because if you know sort of where your neutral, or not neutral, but sort of like your sweet spot is, or where the most, and sometimes I refer to it as like, how lazy can I be and sound the best I can at the same time? Because there's a part of me that's naturally lazy. So, and you know, that may be a negative way of framing it. It's wanting to find efficiency. You know, so if you go to,
makes sense.
Yeah, if you go to the gym, if you play sports, if you play an instrument, obviously. I mean, you could do it with a great deal of tension, but you're going to possibly cause yourself other problems. So you want to find all those ways, those little techniques that people give you to do it in an easier fashion, just give you greater freedom to, let's say, lift more weight or have more agility or whatever it is that you're doing. So I go with that first, and then from there, once you have that, you can say, well, now that I know that my voice does this, when I'm singing in, let's say, the most natural version of myself, or the most, you could say even the most refined, centered version, and that can sound very like esoteric and abstract, but in the sense they're just like, here's my pocket. This is me. This is not me kind of adding anything to the sound. Well, after that, you can add things. You can say like, well, I'm gonna darken the sound, or I'm gonna brighten it, or there's always a limit to that, you know, but you can sing a certain note and literally just hold a long note and just say, well, sometimes I think of it in terms of age, like I want to sound younger here. So if things are sitting normally low and a little bit darker, then I'll specifically change it. So I don't know if I should demo anything.
Sure.
I'm trying to think like of what's a good example. What was I looking at recently? So if I was doing, let's say, I don't know if I'll be starting the right key, but like Home from Beauty and the Beast. So if it starts like, yes, I made the choice, for Papa I will stay. It's a pretty mature sound. If I wanted it to sound a little younger, yes, I made the choice, for Papa I will stay. Now that's just the exact same notes. I've just placed it a little higher in my face. I've thought about the sound in a different physical location. You know, there are, the breath for me sits a little bit different. So there's a bunch of things going on there that now I know how to do them physically. I don't always run through, okay, I don't give myself a checklist before I go. I'm just like, oh, I want it to sound younger. And then I go to that, you know. Now, if I'm teaching it, I'll say, okay, we want to try to achieve a younger sound with this, you know, or an older sound. Or you might want to sound older on this one particular part. So maybe you want to kind of like take it out of everything else you're doing and sort of, I sometimes think about singing in areas or boxes. So if, let's say, the box is kind of sitting here, I'm just like, you might want to put everything else, you might want to put it just up here instead, and then just add a color at some point, you know, to kind of make a point. Mine Hair is kind of a good example of that in cabaret. Generally, it's thought of as being a very sort of dark, like, you have to understand, you know, like if you're doing it like that. But you could do the whole thing like, you have to understand the way I am, mine hair. You know, like, that's too low for me. But if you were going to just add a dark color at one spot, so yeah, that's where the artistry comes in, is that now that you have your ease, then you make choices with color, and I think of it as vocal color, or age is often usually how I think of it for myself personally. I can say a few dream roles that I'd love to play. Before I die, I really want to play Eva Peron in Evita, because I have a secret longing to be a dictator. And that's not true. I would love to play Elphaba in Wicked. A lot of those like strong women roles. And then there's a few here and there where I'm just like, it's so totally different from me. I'd really love to play Doralee in 9 to 5, the Dolly Parton musical. So those are roles. You know, I hope to continue to hopefully be considered as a trustworthy colleague, and somebody who has good artistic sense, and just to continually hopefully meet people that bring out the best in me. That's what I could, you know, add for as a performer. Yeah, I'd say that's it.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much for being here and for doing this interview.